Hi folks, and welcome to Philosophy According to Eddie. And today we're going to have a look at Kantian Ethics. Unsurprisingly, Kantian Ethics were derived by Immanuel Kant, who existed from 1724 until 1804. He was an Enlightenment thinker, inspired by people like Sir Isaac Newton. And this meant he was interested particularly in rational thought, a priori knowledge. He wasn't completely opposed to empirical knowledge, but he believed that truly it was reason, that rational knowledge, which actually provided the best understanding of the world, but also of morality. He was very keen on the ideas of autonomy. People have free will, they are autonomous, i.e. they make their own decisions for themselves, based on themselves, unlike the idea of heteronomy. Heteronomy is the idea that it's, for Kant anyway, that it is other people and other ideas that lead to people making, in particular, moral decisions. Now, Kant was opposed to this, and his Kantian ethics come from these ideas that it must be the individual who chooses what is correct, and that it is the rational mind that can identify what it is that needs to be done, and not a posteriori appeals to either God or other people. Unsurprising that this is the case from someone who came up with the ontological argument reinvention in this period as well. So we're going to have a look at Kant's ideas, how his ethical ideas work, and some of the criticisms of them. Now, of course, if you're a dyed-in-the-wool empiricist, Kantian ethics is going to cause a lot of problems, so objections generally come from empirical ideas, but there are other objections that aren't empirical as well. Kantian ethics are quite different to a lot of other ethical theories that we've looked at, in that they are really, almost entirely, an absolutist set of ethics. There are fixed rules that cannot be broken, according to Kant. This is very different to a lot of ethical theories which tend to be more either situationist or relativist. The reason that these are absolutist theories is that Kant believes that the only way to act morally is to act using reason. Reason is absolute, because reason, rational thinking, leads to fixed truths. A triangle has three sides. Well, if reason creates fixed truths like that, then moral ideas must also be fixed truths. Therefore, there cannot be any ambiguity at all. The rules must be absolute. Now, Kant also goes down the route of the deontological, rather than the teleological, which focuses on the outcomes, the purpose of the actions. Kant goes in completely the opposite direction and says it's all about what you intend to do. Now, immediately you might be thinking, well, how does that work? Why would it be based on intent? And this goes back to autonomy. We choose our goals, we choose what we are going to do, and we can work that out with reason. We cannot work out what outcomes are going to be. Outcomes come about in a very chaotic way, but we can work out our intentions. And if our intentions can be fixed, that means they can be worked out rationally. And if they've been worked out rationally, they must be correct. Because if they weren't correct, they wouldn't work. So on the basis that rational knowledge creates truth, fixed truth, and we can fix our intent, that has to be what we focus on. We can't fix the outcome, but we can fix the intent. So, Kant's idea of ethics, therefore, is based on moral duty. It's based on the idea that we have duties to act in certain ways. We must always act in a certain way, because it's the rational way, it is the correct way. We're not giving way to our appetites, our fears, we're not giving way to other people's view of us. We are working out what is correct in our heads, and following our duty, and that is correct. Now this gives the suggestion, according to Kant, that to be immoral is to be logically incorrect, and to be moral is to be logically correct. And that's very important when we look at the categorical imperatives, which is how Kant phrases his idea of ethics, that we are making logical decisions which are true and are therefore moral. Compare this to the hypothetical imperative. Now, a hypothetical imperative is, if I do this, then the other thing will happen. So, if I go outside when it's raining, I will get wet. If I do this, the other will happen. That's hypothetical because it involves an if. Hypothetical, well, if that were to happen. Categorical imperatives, however, are this must be the case. This will always be the case. Categorically true or categorically false. Imperative, i.e. a command. So it's basically an absolute command, if you like. Command based on the absolute ruling of truth. And there are three forms of the categorical imperative. Kant came up with three forms of the categorical imperative, and they were inventively known as the first, second and third forms of the categorical imperative. These are basically the three branches by which we follow these commands, which are in themselves absolute truths, and how we create a morality for ourselves based on a universal, fundamentally deontological principle. First form, we should always act as we believe everyone ought to act. We only act as you believe all ought to act, and that includes yourself. This logically plays out like so. If you believe that, or if you think I could steal something, you are suggesting that if you do steal it, you want everyone to steal all the time. Because if you thought I can steal but others can't, that's inconsistent. To be consistent, to be rational and logical, you must be saying, if I act in this way, I expect everyone to act like this all the time. Which would mean everyone would be stealing from each other all the time. Doesn't make sense. Okay, so let's rethink that. I think about stealing something, but then I decide to not steal it. Well, on that basis, nobody would ever steal anything according to me acting that way. That's good, that's what we want. We don't want everyone stealing everything, we want people not stealing things. So, yes, let's not steal. Now, how about lying? This is difficult because sometimes we lie for a good outcome. But remember, Kant doesn't want to think about outcomes, he wants to think about intent. If we lie, we suggest that everyone should lie all the time. Society can't work that way. Okay, flip it over. Nobody should ever lie. Can society work that way? Yes. Alright, in which case I won't lie. And that is why Kant believes that you should not lie, you should not steal, and that these are aspects of the categorical imperative. And he believes that as long as you act in that way, any consequences are not your fault. You've done your bit. Second form. Everyone should be treated as an end, not as a means. So, you don't treat people as a way of achieving your goals. You should treat people as a goal in themselves. So, for example, I could steal something from someone in order to, for example, feed my family. Well, we're treating that person as a means to getting food for the family. That's not acceptable. So we can't do that. We have to treat people as being the ultimate goal. People's lives and people's livelihoods as being the ultimate goal. Now, this isn't always easy. In 1941, the town of Coventry was bombed with 30,000 incendiary bombs. 568 people were killed in the fires that came from that. This is in World War II. There is suggestion that actually the British knew about this in advance but didn't evacuate the town, because if they evacuated the town, that would let the Germans know that they could decode their encrypted messages, their secret coded messages. So they decided to not tell the people of Coventry, so that in the future the Germans wouldn't know that they were having their messages decoded and thousands more lives could be saved. Now this is tricky, because on the one hand we're treating the people of Coventry as a means to saving thousands of lives. But if we move the people of Coventry and the Germans get wise, then we're treating the thousands of possible lives in the future as a means to achieving the end of saving the lives of those in Coventry. So what would you do? In that case, if you've got that difficult decision, what would be the best thing to do? According to the first form of the categorical imperative, if we go back, only act as you believe all ought to, do not lie, therefore do not hide this information from the people of Coventry, you should evacuate them. Anything that happens in the future, that would be that outcome, it's up to the future. That's nothing to do with you, you have done your duty. Now, that immediately will make some people feel very uncomfortable, but we'll save that for the objections, which will come later in the video. The third form of the categorical imperative is that we should act as if our actions create laws for everyone to follow. So whatever we do creates a law for others to follow. It really clarifies these first two forms. And it says, if I am to do this action, that is a law that all should follow all the time. And that it will be treating people as an end and not a means. So this sort of sums up the overall feeling. What this does is it creates a moral code, according to Kant, that is based entirely upon you doing your bit to be good, to be rationally moral. Any outcomes are not your fault, because if bad outcomes come about, that's because other people have been immoral, and that's their fault. It's nothing to do with you. So if you lie to, if you tell the truth that your friend is in a house and a murderer comes in and kills them, that's not your fault, it's the murderer's fault. It's got nothing to do with you, you shouldn't feel guilty. Although that in itself is problematic. At this point, it's probably worth establishing the fact that there is debate around whether Kant was Christian or not, whether he was Christian or whether he was atheist. There is quite a lot of suggestion, though, that he was in fact Christian, even though he opposed the ontological argument. And this is particularly notable in his proof that there must be an eternal afterlife for the virtuous. And this is an a priori proof. It doesn't convince everyone, but it runs something like this. God commands us to live a moral life and will therefore reward us with heaven. And this is how we know it. If we live a perfect, virtuous life, we must achieve perfect happiness. Logically, because virtue leads to happiness. Perfect happiness plus the perfect good, which comes from perfect virtue, leads to the summum bonum, highest level, the highest good. If you want, the sort of the ecstasy of heaven. Summum bonum. It's not possible to get this in life, though. We know this. Bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people. There's a problem. But it ought to happen. Now, if it ought to happen, because our morality is a priori, we've worked it out rationally, because it ought to happen, it should therefore logically follow that it will happen. It must happen. Only an immortal God could provide that eternal, perfect happiness. Therefore, God must exist, and therefore an afterlife must exist. Now, number 4, because it ought to occur, it will occur, is the sort of the weak link there. Getting from value to fact is a big problem, and we'll pick up on that when we come to second year meta-ethics. It's called the fact-value problem. However, for now, it's the sticking point that we need to bear in mind. However, this, in theory, according to Kant, is a proof for God's existence and for an eternal afterlife. There are, of course, objections to Kant's approach. Are we really right in thinking that we can be moral without considering the consequences? This seems to go against a lot of our own human nature. We naturally think about what's going to be the right thing to do. Now, Kant would say that's just because we're listening to other people, we're listening to tradition, we're not actually thinking this out for ourselves. But then in that case, why do we have a conscience? Why do we have an instinct of feeling guilty if bad things happen to people? It's all based on consequences. If we were to perform an action and it led to something bad happening, we'd feel guilty. Why would God give us that, if you're a Christian, or why would we have evolved with that if we weren't in some way tied in to a teleological approach to ethics? Also, what do you do with principle clashes? I mentioned the idea of Coventry earlier in the Second World War, and although you can sort of refer back to another part of the categorical imperative, if we're being really specific here, surely there shouldn't be any clashes between principles, and there shouldn't be any kind of logical problems, because logic is perfect truth. So the fact that there can be principle clashes causes a problem for the logical rationality that we get with Kant's viewpoints. And thinking about that, are ethics actually purely rational at all? It's not just about whether we consider consequences or not, it's whether this idea of the rational, the reasoned approach is actually correct. What about how we feel when we feel responsible for people? And again, referring back to the conscience. So going to the depth of it, maybe trying to link reason into ethics is a bad move and a mistake. The idea of cold charity is one where people do the right thing but without the right attitude. So people aren't glad to give to charity or glad to help people. They do it because they feel they must. Surely we all feel that if people actually want to do things and do the right thing, that's better than people who do it resentfully or just out of duty. It's these sort of attitudinal issues to do with our attitude. Aristotle himself said it's not okay to simply do the right thing, you should do it with the right attitude. It was this whole idea of virtue. And finally, the world itself isn't necessarily rational. There's no rational suggestion that actually we are going to go to heaven at the end of this, that there is anything other than this cold rock which is hurtling through space. That could just be a brutal fact. We're making a lot of presumptions if we follow Kant's analysis of the summum bonum leading to the idea that we will achieve heavenly bliss with God. And if that's the case, can we trust any of the rest of the rationale that leads us there? Finally, although I haven't mentioned it here, if you are an empiricist, if you follow in the tradition of Hume or Locke or any of the other great empiricists of that era, then you probably won't be so taken with such a rational a priori approach. But that's more a difference of opinion rather than a weakness. So there you have it, Kantian Ethics. We've looked at how Kant has decided that you can deduce ethical theories from reason, how he has, as far as he's concerned, proved that autonomous reason is the only true way to make sure you're making a good decision. We've looked at the categorical imperative in its 3 forms. We've also looked at the objection to ethics through pure reason and the deontology and absolutism that comes with them. If you have any questions, of course, let me know as ever. Thanks for watching. See you next time.